Appreciate everybody showing up. We do have to admit something right out of the gate, that our panel actually got just about zero time to rehearse. So this is kind of a open mic session. If the last panel was a TV show, it'd be like The Young and the Restless, and ours is going to be more like a reality TV show, I think. So, well, something like that. So, anyway, last night I was sitting there thinking about the annual meeting, like I'm sure you've all done when you're laying there trying to go to sleep and realizing we just worked through a flood when the Civic Center just about flooded. So I thought, just about anything could happen today. So you want to watch this one, folks. This could come off the rails quickly. So I have up here with me 2 engineers, and I got a CPA and a finance person. So you can see how this thing could get wild quickly. I have some of Basin Electric's finest here. Truly honored to work with all of them. We're going to be walking through the investments that your cooperative is making to help serve your load in a reliable and affordable manner. To my immediate left, I have Becky Kern. Some of you have seen her before. She's VP of Resource Planning and Rates. She's got 21 years with Basin Electric, and she can tell you more about the depths of the reserve margin or take you into the member rate components till you scream. So we're glad to have her. Right immediately next to her is Matt Ehrman. He's VP of Engineering and Construction. He's got 23 years with the cooperative. He's going to be watching over every single last detail of all the construction projects that we have. So you're already seeing this is kind of like a TED Talks meets a Jerry Springer show, right? So it's going to get crazy. And then next to him, we've got Katrina Wald. She's our VP and Controller. Katrina's been with us for 8 years. I've worked with Katrina in the forecasting and budgeting group. She was previously with WBI here in town as financial planning and reporting. Katrina's a rock solid CPA, and I'd trust her with my life. So Katrina, if you're not going to throw any chairs at any of these people or anything, are you?
We'll see.
Okay, yeah, see? You're all sitting on the edge of your seat, I can see it. And then lastly, we've got Sarah Sherm. She's our VP and Treasurer. She just joined Basin last year. She was previously the Manager of Financial Planning and Analysis with our neighbors Tri-State. So she's new to our team, but brings lots of experience from our neighbors with Tri-State. And I know she's probably thinking right now, what in the world did I get myself into volunteering for this panel? So appreciate you coming, Sarah. So
you read my mind, Andy.
All right, well, let's jump into this. Many of you are experiencing your own tremendous amount of growth. You've heard a lot about it this morning. There's just a lot going on in the industry in every direction. And we understand that we've got a lot going on, and ultimately we're solving this for the rates of our members. And in doing so, Becky, could you kind of walk us through the process, and then maybe Matt and Katrina could jump in too and show us how we get from point A to point B with the member rates.
Sure, Andy, I can start things off and hand to my colleagues here. The first thing that we look at, and is probably one of the foundational things, is the development of the annual load forecast. And so as I said, we do that annually. We've seen load growth change quite frequently over the last number of years, and so we'll do that every single year. That starts with looking at historical information, developing models for each and every distribution cooperative on a residential, commercial, industrial basis, kind of all aspects. It gets down to the county level to very much understand, what's going on in each one of your systems. Those models are developed and ran and develop more math-based forecasts that identify load growth for the future for you. We share that information with each of you for your review. We also ask for additional inside knowledge, local knowledge that you have that can better predict the future, stuff that we may not be able to gain from those math-based forecasts. And so we also ask for any newer large spot loads that are going on in your system and add those to the forecast. Those forecasts are then approved locally. They get moved up to the G&Ts and finally to Basin for their approval. We also sometimes will develop bandwidth forecasts or scenarios that, depending on different things that may be going on or drivers that could change the future, that we would develop various scenarios. Once we've established those load forecasts, we will push that into all of our different planning processes. It will go into power supply planning, transmission planning, financial forecasts, rate development. I'll spend just a little bit of time on the power supply planning side. From there, we will initially bring that new load forecast into our process. We'll evaluate and review our existing fleet of resources or the resource portfolio that we have, identify anything that could potentially be changing in the future that could impact our ability to utilize those resources, identify what our future capacity and energy positions look like. Do we have any gaps? What type of need for additional power supply do we have? And then we'll begin an alternative evaluation review. Typically that will include going out for requests for proposals to identify what maybe purchase options may be available out on the market or from neighboring utilities, options that could be built for us. We'll also work with our engineering team to develop some generation tech assessments, and I think Matt may talk a little bit more about that process. But we'll bring that information in, perform that alternative evaluation to identify kind of a proposed plan moving forward. So with that, I think I'll pass to Matt here.
Yeah, Becky mentioned the generation, the tech assessments, and our engineering and construction team works very closely with everybody up here on stage, as well as a lot of others. Each year, we work on some generation technology assessments to develop costs really for new generation that gets further review. We start with really kind of all the above technologies: coal, gas, nuclear, all kinds, renewables, batteries, and we tailor the sizes and kind of the makeup of those different options to fit Basin's need. Try to find options that would actually be buildable and things that we know that we could execute. We take for each of those options, we make reasonable assumptions about things. We look at how long might a gas pipeline be, a transmission line, the connecting facilities, and really boil that down into the end result being a really detailed look at the expected cost, the performance, the different operating characteristics, how fast do things start, how flexible are they, how far can they turn down, things like that, right down to the emissions, and those results are shared within Basin and are used as inputs to evaluate how to best serve the load. Another process that the engineering team very closely involved in is the long-range engineering plan. We refer to that as the LREP. It's another important business tool. It's been around as long as I've been at Basin, although we continue to refine it over the years. It's a coordinated effort really between all the areas of the co-op with the purpose of identifying all the new capital commitments over the next 10 years. And it includes a look at all of the facilities, big commitments, small commitments, everything from new power plants down to pickup trucks. It all gets included in the plan, and along the way there's an awful lot of discussions with key representatives from all the facilities discussing the capital needs and the type of projects that we think we'd need to do in order to meet some of our strategic goals. And that all gets wrapped up into report and identifies the need, the justification for the projects, the costs, and the timing of those needs as well. And they're all reviewed, scrutinized up through executive leadership, and ultimately brought to the board. And that process is key input to the financial forecast, and works really in parallel with a lot of the other processes being discussed here. And with that, I'll maybe turn it over to Katrina to talk a little bit about the financial forecast.
Yeah, so the finance team works really closely with Matt's group and Becky's group as the member load forecast and then that long-range engineering plan where we have the investments that we're going to need to serve our load. Those are key pieces to our financial forecast. So we include assumptions related to or associated with the load forecast and the long-range engineering plan in our financial forecast, along with a lot of other assumptions. We're making assumptions in regards to commodity prices, interest rates, what our debt issuances are going to be to finance those investments. We're also looking at estimates for surplus sales. We work a lot, we work closely with our plant facilities and our headquarters facilities on their operating and maintenance budgets as well. So we blend a lot of those assumptions together, and ultimately we come up with a cost of service. And then from that cost of service, that drives what the revenue requirement is or what we need to collect from our members to ensure that we're recovering our costs. And then that's how we end up getting to the member rate. So by going through that whole process of financial forecasting, that's essentially, you can see how important it is that we have accurate load forecasts, that we're including the right investments in our LREP because it's going to drive the member rate at the end of the day.
So I know some of you were thinking we just took the load forecast and put it in the front end of the gonculator and pushed the button and then it gave us a member rate, but obviously that's not the case. We see Becky's group processing the load forecast. We see Matt's group working on the long-range engineering plan, figuring out what machines or how we're going to serve that load. And then ultimately Katrina's group taking that into account, adding in all the expenses side of things in order to solve for the member rate. So to dig just a little bit deeper into that, Becky, you know, you had mentioned the member load. What are you seeing year over year and changes in the member load within the financial forecast?
I think maybe first off, just to mention again, you know, I think you heard Todd earlier today, you know, over the last 2 years or so, we've seen around 7% of growth on our annual member sales. So we're seeing substantial increases in our member load obligations. As we completed our most recent load forecast that was completed at the end of last year, early part of this year, the first 10 years of that forecast is showing around 3% annual load growth each and every year. You know, some years are significantly larger than 3%, some are less than that, but kind of over that 10-year period, it averages out to about 3%. You know, when we look at what are some of the major drivers in there, we're seeing a lot of just larger loads. You know, there are some crypto loads, that's been mentioned a number of times, probably some data, AI starting to show up in there. We're also starting to see hydrogen, ammonia, carbon capture, a number of just different industrial, agricultural. Again, continued oil and gas development is continuing to show up in there. There's just lots of different aspects that are going on across the entire member service territory. And a number of these things are tied to federal tax incentives. And so that has a very major impact, at least what we're seeing right now. And we will be working and are actively working on the completion of a new load forecast that's targeted to be completed here later this year. So we'll have additional newer information that will identify, you know, is that rate of growth, that projection that we were seeing last year, is it still consistent? Is it changing? Is it accelerating? Is it taking a little longer? You know, just all that timing and what will it look like in the future? Another aspect that we've added to our load forecasting process is what we've called a load growth pipeline. Just because we've seen so much changes to load growth here over the last number of years, and a lot of times it's been very high probable projects that got added to that load forecast, just needing a more enhanced and more communication on what's going on within the entire membership, things that are kind of on the horizon that you're watching, to give us a better understanding of kind of what's out there, where could it go if different things move forward. So definitely watching all of that as well.
And we all know that we're in a regional trade organization and RTOs, and we've recently heard that some of those RTOs have been increasing the reserve requirement, which is the excess we need to have in store. Can you tell me what you're seeing on that side of things? How will that impact the cooperative and the membership and where we sit on things?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, SPP has been looking at making changes or some broader reform on resource adequacy over the last year or so. A number of the things that are being modified is how you accredit your resources, be it renewable resources, more conventional resources, focusing in on how those units are performing at the most critical time, how much are they available, and factoring that into their accreditation values. They've also adopted a requirement in the winter season. We've always had to report what our winter season our information is, but there's never been a potential of a deficiency charge associated with being short in the winter season. That has been modified and will be moving forward with that requirement to comply with a winter season. The most recent change is that they have adopted a higher planning reserve margin, that amount of excess generating capacity that's needed to have on the system to help manage through unplanned events on the system. And so all of those changes are actually driving Basin to need additional winter season generating capacity here when that will be implemented with all of these changes. Right now, that's looking like that could be as early as 2026. And so we'll definitely be looking at, what we need here, 26 and beyond, to help comply with all of those modifications to resource adequacy. And I think the last part of the question, Andy, that you had maybe asked about is, how are we looking to handle that? We did start working on PGS for Pioneer here a number of years. That's going to bring a significant amount of capacity to us here once that's operational next year. We are looking at additional generation in western North Dakota, targeting that 2030 time period. We've also started working on some demand response, different loads that may be interested in participating in demand response programs that could be available in the future. Conversing with our neighbors inside of SPP, are there other market opportunities that could be sought after, or maybe some seasonal swaps that could be put in place to help comply with this? The other thing is that we will be re-reviewing our load forecast. And again, that load forecast is so critical to this. It's what we use to identify what we need in the future. And that re-review will help, again, identify the timing and the magnitude on how much we need when these changes go into effect. One more aspect is that the new accreditation rules for the conventional resources, how those units, our existing fleet, operates, evaluating, is there anything else that we should be doing? Are those resources absolutely available at the most critical times when they need to be? That will pay, the accreditation value there is going to be very, very important as we look to the future.
All right, Becky had mentioned Pioneer Generating Station, and I'm glad she brought that up because I think Katrina earlier this morning was talking about the significant investment that we're going to need to make for the membership in order to fulfill that load. Can you tell us a little bit, Katrina, about how big is this investment and what impacts will that have?
Yeah, so I think we've heard a couple times this morning that over the next 10 years, we're estimating our capital expenditures to be around $8 billion. That's right, I said $8 billion. That's quite a significant amount of money. And 80% of that is in new generation and transmission. However, we also have about $1 billion that we're projected to spend in our existing facilities. So we're hoping that our existing facilities can last another 10, 20 years or even longer. So those are important to our generation fleet. In addition to some of the investments we're making on the capital side, we're including renewables into our portfolio through purchase power agreements. We also have some projects that maybe Matt's going to hit on a little bit later, or Becky. We're going to be repowering some of our existing wind facilities in South Dakota and North Dakota. That's kind of a highlight of some of our capital expenditures. In addition to capital, our investments in capital, we're also looking at investments in technology. So our IT group has been busy with various system upgrades, and then we're also embarking on a big system upgrade, and that's going to be our enterprise resource planning system. We're going to be replacing that system. As Chris mentioned this morning, that's going to be a 3-year project. So it's going to be a long and grueling project, but I'm very much looking forward to that project and the opportunities it's going to provide for us. The things we're thinking about we can do with that new system is that we'll be able to streamline processes, be able to implement best practices to increase our efficiencies. And then also a component of that project, the ERP project, is financial planning and forecasting, hoping to increase the functionality associated with our financial planning and forecasting so that we can adjust to changes more quickly, update our forecasts more frequently, and provide better information in the financial realm of things. I should also mention that we're also investing in our team. So we've been adding new talent to our team over the past few years. Also, our HR department is working on development opportunities for our existing employees. And then our HR team has also implemented an initiative of employee engagement. So the last 2 years, we have participated in a Gallup employee engagement survey, and we've learned a lot from that survey as to how we're going to keep our teams engaged. It's so important for our people to be engaged, as we know when people are engaged, they're going to be more productive. So with all that investing, I think, Andy, the second part of your question is, what impacts is that going to have to us financially? Well, it's going to have a significant impact on our balance sheet. Currently, we're at about $8 billion in total assets. At the end of 10 years, our 10-year financial forecast, we're projecting that our total assets on our balance sheet will be over $13 billion. So that's quite a bit of growth in a 5-year time frame. But you can be assured that as we're investing those dollars, we're going to be using financial discipline. We have a very robust due diligence process, and to ensure that we're making investments that are going to provide value for us over time. I kind of think back to what our predecessors had to do many years ago when they had to make decisions as to whether to invest dollars in Leland Old Station or Antelope Valley Station. That was the 60s, 70s, and 80s time frame, and those assets are still providing great value to us. So we hope that we'll be able to make those investments that can provide value over time.
Now, this investment obviously is going to have to be financed. Sarah, let's bring you into the loop here. What sources of financing does the co-op have access to, and what will all this investment do to our debt levels?
Yeah, so first I think we need to acknowledge our main source of financing, which is our membership. And oftentimes we don't always think of the membership as financiers, but I touched on it this morning, and when we set our margin each year and collect margin from the membership, they're funding roughly 25% of our capital projects through that margin. So they really are our largest single source of funding at any given time. Now, that leaves 75% that we have to find elsewhere, and that's where we look to our bank partners and going out in the capital markets. You know, as a cooperative, obviously, we don't issue stocks, so we're out there borrowing debt. When we look at the financial forecast, we're seeing that over the next 10 years, we'll issue about $5 billion of additional debt, with about $3 billion of that coming in the next 5 years. For a little context, our current debt balance is under $5 billion, so we're talking about essentially doubling it in the next decade.
And as we get the financing, as we're looking at the investment, we get the financing, then obviously we're in this construction phase, and we're going to look to Matt a little bit and talk a little bit about what you're seeing, Matt, as far as inflation and the impacts of construction. That, I mean, obviously this country's been in the grips of incredible inflation. What are you seeing on the construction side of things?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So the teams, they're always monitoring the markets for the types of components that we're using in our industry, and I think everybody's aware that the markets for a lot of those components, at least everybody in this room is aware that those have changed pretty significantly recently. It was mentioned earlier a little bit about some of the supply chain issues and disruptions. That's been going on for a while now, as well as you mentioned the inflation, Andy. But there's just been an incredible increased spike in demand for components. There's lots of projects in development around the world. We're developing a lot of projects. There's a lot of others also developing projects. Everyone's really trying to get their hands on the same pieces of equipment all kind of at once, it seems like. And as a result of that, oftentimes the raw materials and the factories just aren't able to keep up with demand. Just maybe a few examples of that. The costs for transformers, a lot of this is on the electrical side, but transformers, breakers, those types of materials have increased recently by as much as 50% or more. And the lead times as well. Again, transformers, we used to be able to get some of the large, substation, the high voltage transformers in 18 months. Now those are taking anywhere from 4 to 5 years. Breakers, also the high voltage, the breakers used at all the substations. Those we used to be able to get in 6 months, and are also taking up towards 4 to 5 years if you can even get your hands on them at all. It's becoming increasingly challenging. So overall, it takes longer and it's costing more to develop new projects, and we've had to adjust our strategies along the way. We've increased our stocking levels. I think that's been talked about a little bit here today, about trying to get more things in the warehouse, making sure that we have parts on hand to keep up with maintenance, but as well as the projects that are on the horizon. So trying to keep up with both of those efforts, and that's becoming challenging. We've also had to adjust our project execution strategies to adapt to things. We've had to make procurement decisions earlier in the projects than we have in the past, and just start the whole planning process earlier than we typically had. So we try to mitigate all those the impacts the best we can, and even then we still get some curveballs thrown our way. Things don't always show up on time. You can't get things, but that's when the teams that we have, the engineering team, the procurement teams, the construction teams, really, in any project, they manage those surprises really the best they can to try to keep the projects overall within the approved budget and schedule.
Well, folks, I hope you're paying attention. If this is a reality TV show, we're going to have to vote one of these folks off the stage here in a little bit, so you'll get your text ready. So, Matt, when we're talking about this inflation, can you tell us a little bit about how does our existing generation compare to some of the new gen we're building out, and then what do you think that is going to happen to that in the future?
Okay, yeah, Andy, I think mentioned earlier, just the last question there, costs have really increased in a lot of areas for a variety of reasons. And I think there was a slide shown earlier also that showed some of the costs of our legacy generation is about $800 a kW in terms of an overall net book value. In addition to the market influences, the costs for new generation are also dependent on the generation, the technology, the size. There can be economies of scale. So the size of the unit matters, the type of the generator matters. They all provide different values as well. There's different site-specific costs, with the fuel supply and the transmission and all that. So we can expect those costs to continually change depending on the makeup of the specific project or the group of projects that we're discussing. But just a few examples: the Pioneer generation station, the Phase 4 expansion that's been talked about a fair amount today. That's a combination of different simple cycle technologies. It's got some recip engines as well as some simple cycle gas turbines. And the expected cost for that project, it's still in construction, but expected to come in around $1,300 a kW. And there's a lot of moving pieces, but the cost for a latest advanced combined cycle, those costs are approximately $1,700 to $2,000 a kW now. And capital costs are extremely important. Like I mentioned, each of those different resources also provides different values. So the overall values of all those are evaluated to determine what the best solution would be.
So in the midst of all this too, we're seeing incredible interest rates going up. I'm sure there's probably some members in here that have got some cash parked at a bank for over 5%. But Sarah, what are you seeing on that side, and how will that impact things as far as the interest rates go?
Yeah, that's right. So on top of the increased just costs overall, we are seeing a run up in interest rates over the past couple years. And Andy, you mentioned it in the context of kind of the interest income and earning on your investments, which Basin is in that realm too of the excess funds that we have, we're able to invest at roughly 5%, but the larger impact on our financial performance is the increase in interest expense on new borrowings. So, for example, in 2021, we were able to issue debt below 3%. And right now, if I took that same issuance out into the market, we would be likely paying upwards of 6% on that. So that 3% increase in interest rates, if you apply that to, say, a $500 million debt issuance, we're talking about $15 million of interest expense per year on top of what we would have paid a few years ago. So it is significant. It's something that we're monitoring, especially given the amount of debt we have to issue going forward. I won't name any names, but there's a banker in the room who told me last night that rates are going to start going down. I may hold him to that on our next debt issuance, so we'll see.
He's not going to stand up, are they? Well, as we're going through this huge investment, we're very cognizant that we're spending member dollars. Katrina, can you talk a little bit about some of the safeguards that we have in place to ensure that the dollars that we're investing in the projects and that there's safeguards around that and some stop blocks in place?
Yeah, so Chris mentioned we have a committee, the Project Review Committee. He mentioned a little bit about that it's a cross-functional team, and that cross-functional team meets 2 times a month. And I can tell you, I'm a part of that team, that team is not afraid to ask questions of the project manager as far as, okay, questioning assumptions, looking at the project for whether it's in alignment with our strategic objectives. I mean, the team is really working well together and making sure that we're making investments, doing our due diligence process. Some of the other things that the team looks at is when certain projects, if they're in excess of a dollar threshold, they require an economic model to be developed. So there's been times when assumptions have been included in that model, and we'll go back to the project manager and say, hey, what if you ran this sensitivity? Just to get an idea for a larger range of outcomes. Once again, to make sure we're making an investment, we're doing our due diligence in regard to these investments. A couple other things the team evaluates is the project risks. We identify project risks. And one key component of identifying project risks is there project off-ramps. So for example, if we get into a situation where we have a challenging project, we're not sure how we're going to move forward with it, is there a way we can exit that project without having a significant financial impact? So those are some of the things that the team is looking at. Ultimately, that project review committee is supporting our executive management team and the board by providing a review process for projects and providing a recommendation. But at the end of the day, it's up to our board and our executive leadership team to approve the projects.
And Matt, let's turn to you a little bit. We've talked a lot about future projects. We got a lot going on there, obviously. I think we've conveyed that. Can you tell us about some of these projects where we've got actually shovels in the ground already and get us up to speed on some of those in more detail?
Yeah, Andy, I'll begin on the generation side. The PGS, the Pioneer, the Phase 4 expansion that's underway, that's been discussed a little bit today already, but that project is adding nearly 600 megawatts. It's a natural gas-fired generation resource, and that would represent an investment of around $800 million. It consists of several different technologies, reciprocating engines, and as well as 2 combustion turbines. Construction on that project began spring of 2023, and there's just an awful lot going on right now. The workforce up there, this is just west of Williston a little bit. That's peaking around 450 people on site. They're well over half of the way through with the project, and nearly all of the major pieces of the puzzle, the components are set in place, still waiting for a generator step-up transformer. But the engines are set, they're in buildings. The turbines are set, they're in buildings. Things are really looking like a power plant already. We've got the gas pipeline in place up there. We've got the 13-mile, the 345 kV line that connects the site over to the Judson substation. that's also in full swing. Things are far enough along there that conductors beginning to be strung and put in place, and we're just a month or so away from beginning to backfeed some power into the plant. And overall, we're looking at a phased commercial operation date for the different units, with the reciprocating engines coming online next spring, anticipating in March, and the first turbine just slightly behind that in June, and the second one getting that online next fall. And the teams are really focused on meeting those objectives, understand how valuable that generation is to the membership. They're also really continue to focus on safety while finishing within the approved budget and schedule for all of these projects. And I'll switch over to transmission now a little bit. Covered the generation. One of the major projects going on, and I think Chris Johnson had some pictures of the Roundup to Coomer Ridge, the transmission line in northwest North Dakota. That's also been under construction here this season. That project involves a little over 30 miles of 345 kV line as well, through some very challenging terrain. It crosses the Little Missouri River Valley. That's a lot different than what much of our service territory looks like. That project alone represents an investment of another $90 million, and is a very valuable transmission for the membership, as shown on some of the slides previously, the congestion up in the area as well. As I mentioned, construction on that began this spring, and really working hard to get that online as soon as we can. We actually have several crews working on parallel in a lot of different fronts. The crews are framing and setting structures just as fast as we can get material delivered, and to the point on that project where the conductor's also beginning to be strung up there. The team's making excellent progress, and we anticipate energizing that line before the end of the year. And there's also an extensive amount of substation projects in progress. Currently, our engineering and construction team and Jeremy's transmission team, there's over 20 substation projects going on in various phases of engineering, procurement, construction, more than I can name here. Those would include greenfield substations, some of the aging infrastructure projects that have been discussed, terminal additions, transformer, reactor additions, really all of the above. So there's very active in that area. Those substation projects alone also represent about $300 million of investment. Really very busy on multiple fronts.
So you're out working on the projects that we've got in place right now. I know, Sarah, you recently were out in the markets and saw some of what we're seeing out there. Can you give us a recap on that? Are banks willing to lend to the cooperative still?
Yeah, so since this time last year, we've issued about $500 million of additional debt. And we have great relationships with the bank groups, with our financing partners out there. And I guess the short answer to your question is yes, there are definitely groups out there who are still willing to lend to the cooperative. That being said, there's certain markets that we've typically issued in, particularly the private placement market, where we're starting to see that we're reaching kind of limited capacity within those markets. So individual investors kind of have limits on how much of a certain company they can have outstanding, how much debt to companies they can have outstanding. And right now in the private placement market, we have over $3 billion of debt outstanding, which makes us one of the largest utility issuers in that market. Earlier this year, we did complete a $370 million financing within the private placement market. And while it was a successful transaction, I think it really highlighted for us that we are starting to reach capacity with a number of investors out there, and that we need to start looking towards our next sources as we look forward.
And one thing we got to talk about a little bit is we know that dispatchable generation is incredibly important to our membership. I think that was crystal clear today when Alex was up here and asked for that hand vote. So let's talk a little bit about that as far as additional dispatchable generation, Matt. What can you tell us about that in the further far off future where we don't have a shovel in the ground right now.
Yeah, Andy, it's been mentioned a little bit before already today, but the team, all the teams really had identified, like you mentioned, a need for additional dispatchable generation. And late last year, we began really in full force on the development of a greenfield dispatchable, natural gas-fired resource. Currently working on the project definition for that project. We have diligently reviewed the fuel, the transmission, how the units dispatch, permitting of the project, and have selected our preferred site in Northwest North Dakota. And the team has gone through and looked at the different technologies and the configurations, and that's been settled on, looking at two one-on-one combined cycle units. Those would all be located at a single site. It would look much like two Deer Creek stations side by side, if you could picture that, but really much larger. The turbine technology they'd be based on would be quite a bit larger. The current design is approaching upwards of 12 to 1,400 megawatts, and the turbines involved, they'd be looking at a J-class turbine, kind of the most efficient, the most advanced combustion turbines in combined cycle. And the team's really busy now with all the things we talked about, with the moving parts on the breakers and the transformers, and kind of all the pieces of the puzzle that you need to build a power plant. They're working to solidify the costs and the lead times for all those long lead equipments. Like we mentioned, we have to begin that much earlier than we had in the past in the process. So really locking those things down, confirming assumptions, getting spots in the queue for those items. Really need to confirm those assumptions in order to get a complete cost estimate and a schedule that we know we can execute. And looking at having the final project definition complete by the end of the year.
So that's a little bit on the dispatchable side of things. I think a lot of people don't realize that Basin Electric is owner of it is the largest cooperative-owned wind farm in the United States, and they also you're part of a group that has the most renewable generation of any other GNT in the U.S. as well. And I think just this week, the board had approved repowering one of our wind facilities. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Matt, and why is it being done, and how will that go?
Yeah, Andy, another project the team is very actively involved in. Began with a look. We were aware that the original blades at our Prairie Winds, North Dakota and South Dakota wind parks were beginning to near the end of life. So we were aware that something needed to be done. The various teams analyzed different options, including reblading, retirement, repowering, all the different options available. Included in those reviews were review of the impacts of some of the various financial incentives, including the option for direct pay for the co-ops. That analysis concluded that, as you mentioned, repowering our two co-op-owned wind parks would bring the most value to the membership, and the board did take action to approve that this week. So the team is full steam ahead, moving along with that option. Repowering of those wind parks would involve, for all 188 turbines combined at both sites, would involve slightly longer blades. I think that's about a 60% increase in the swept area. They can operate a little bit more efficiently, so they'd have longer blades, replace the hubs, gearbox, and some generator improvements. Overall, we're expecting to have those repowers complete, the North Dakota project in the fall of 26, and the South Dakota project in the fall of 27.
All right, Becky, you got anything to add, or did he get it all in the bag? All right, I didn't want you to fall asleep, so I haven't come to you in a while. So we talked a lot about generation, both dispatchable and non-dispatchable, but honestly, you can produce all the power you want, but if you can't get it there, you still have nothing. Can you talk a little bit, Matt, about what we're doing on the east side of Lake Sakakawea with that transmission piece there?
Yeah, Andy, we refer to the project as our East Loop project. The project that's been in development for a number of years, and it's really a massive project for Basin. 345 kV transmission line. It would extend from the Leland Old substation to our Tandy substation up near Tioga, North Dakota. The team has spent a lot of time, working with landowners, evaluating alternate routes. I think the team's evaluated over 700 miles of different routes and settled in on the final route that's about 160 miles long. The project would also include several new substations, including the old substation, the large substation that was referenced earlier. Right-of-way work for the project's continuing. The procurement for the structures and the conductor are behind us, beginning to look at the timing of those different deliveries and things. The team's working on the details and planning to submit PSC applications yet this fall and to begin construction on that transmission line next summer. That project represents an investment of approximately $400 million, and again, that'll be a very valuable transmission line for the membership to get up around the east side of the lake and kind of connect things better.
Gotcha. Sarah, this morning, I think Chris Johnson, our CFO, had mentioned about the potential of becoming SEC or Security Exchange Commission registrant. Can you tell us a little bit about the need for that and what the impacts would be on the membership?
Yeah, so Matt keeps coming up with projects, so we have to find a way to pay for them. But this really builds on the last conversation about us running into limits within the private placement market in particular. With the amount of capital we need to raise going forward, we really need to find new sources of financing. The public bond market, which is where we would ultimately issue SEC bonds, has a much larger investor base. So by comparison, in the private placement market, there's about $12 billion of utility issuances done each year. In the public market, that number is about 90 billion. So it's just a lot more dollars to spread around, and that's really why we're looking at it. Regarding the SEC registration part, I think it's important to understand what the SEC actually regulates. So they regulate disclosure of information. They're concerned about your investors having equal information about the company and making sure that one investor doesn't know something that can give them an advantage over others on making the decision of, do I buy this bond or do I not buy this bond? What they don't regulate is the underlying business activity. So they wouldn't be coming into Basin and telling us how we need to run our business. What they would be telling us is what we need to disclose about how we run our business. So I think that's a key distinction. Regarding impacts to the membership, there's honestly some benefits. I would say that there will be increased transparency. And that's not to say that Basin isn't transparent currently, but when we become an SEC registrant, we'll be required to file certain documents, one being an annual report that's called a 10K, and it's basically a go-to book about everything you could ever possibly want to know about Basin Electric. So the question that a member had that they may be trying to figure out, who do I ask, how do I track down this information, that'll likely be in that book that gets published out on our website and out with the SEC. There may be some changes in the way that we give information to members and the timing around which we're able to do so. But overall, I think the impact would be pretty minimal to the membership.
Becky, I have a question for you. Are you ready? We talk a lot about all the above energy strategy, which is what your cooperative believes in. That's what the board has set forth for us. It's real similar to not putting all your eggs in one basket. There's obviously some comfort in having our own steel in the ground, owning the machines that produce the power, but there's also another component of that, one of the other eggs in the basket, if you will, and that's a purchase power agreement. Can you tell me what you're seeing on that side of things?
Sure, Andy. Every year, or almost every year, we do go out and investigate what options are available out in the market. Earlier this year, we did release power supply request for proposal, primarily focusing more on the fringe areas of our member systems, where we've got more market exposure, focusing in the MISO footprint and also in Montana, trying to identify what type of options were available there. We have recently moved forward with a new tolling arrangement in MISO to start here in the next couple of years that will get us some dispatchable energy here going forward and some capacity. We are also working on acquiring some point-to-point transmission service that will help connect our system down in Wyoming up into Montana. That will help really tie our system together more in the Western interconnection, allow us to move some of that excess power that we have coming out of Dry Fork and Laramie River Station in the west, and move that again to member load up in Montana. We're also focusing in on a number of renewable power purchase agreements here in July, and additionally here in August. We did get authorization to move forward with 4 new power purchase agreements, primarily renewables. Moving those forward, those in addition to some other power purchase agreements that we had entered into previously will all be part of a new era application that we will be submitting here very, very shortly. And maybe Sarah, I can ask you to help me hear more about the program.
Sure. And I think at this point, a lot of people in the room are probably familiar with the New Era program, but just at a high level, it is part of the overall Inflation Reduction Act. It offered $9.7 billion to electric cooperatives in the forms of either grants or low-cost loans to either help with carbon reduction efforts or investment in renewable projects. So how Basin is looking at the program is, I would say, in 2 ways. So a lot of the purchase power agreements that Becky mentioned will actually be able to apply for grants related to those PPAs. And how that would work is that we would actually receive grant funds as we make the payments, and those funds would help to reduce the purchase power expense. The other thing that we're looking at related to the wind repower projects that Matt spoke about a little bit ago is that we can get not only grants to help with the construction of those repowerings, but also low interest rate loans. Those rates would come in at about 2%, so significantly lower than what we can get out in the market right now.
So let's not to forget about the investment in some of our solid generators that brought us to the dance. So think Leland Oil Station in North Dakota, Laramie River Station in Wyoming, Antelope Valley Station in North Dakota, Dry Fork Station in Wyoming. And what are we doing at those facilities to make sure that they continue to be reliable and there for us when we get a winter storm Uri? Matt, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the new facilities and things going on, but there is a lot of activity as well at the existing facilities, more than we probably have time to talk about here today. But just a lot of projects involved that are required to keep the plants operating safely, reliably, efficiently, and also environmentally responsibly. One of the larger efforts underway is similar to what Jeremy described earlier in terms of the aging, the substation electrical infrastructure. There's similar projects like that. There's been aging infrastructure projects going on at the generating facilities as well, just inside the plant fence, replacing some of the medium voltage, low voltage equipment there as well. That equipment is approaching 40 years old, and when it goes down, it's hard to get, similar to some of the other electrical equipment we've talked about. So it can have a really, really big impact. So some of those projects are still ongoing at Laramie River Station, beginning to wind down. We began a few at Antelope Valley stations as well, just to keep the electrical infrastructure going. A lot of work on the mechanical side as well. So in addition to the electrical work, there's been a lot of investment lately related to environmental controls. I think Aaron spoke to that a little bit earlier. been work on the LRS down at the precipitator, replacing the internals there to maintain good reliability and compliance. Also working on the LRS, the ponds down at Laramie River Station to comply with the coal combustion residuals regulations down there. And the teams continually identify areas of need, develop plans, and execute projects. At any given time, outside of these large projects, we talk about the teams are managing a couple hundred other smaller projects.
So to take us home, Matt, it seems like there's, especially in the news, you hear a lot of stuff about the next generation type, whether it's hydrogen or nuclear. Seems like there's constantly something that's hitting us. How does Basin Electric kind of vet through what's real, what's maybe not as real, and what we can afford even? How do you approach that?
Yeah, there's a team within Basin called the Horizons team. Consists of about a dozen people, and it's a really good cross section from all areas of the co-op. It's been around. It's nothing new. That team, I think, has been in place for about 10 years. And that team evaluates opportunities to support new technology, reviews different opportunities to fund new technologies, and also looks at requests from the membership and others, and for our own needs, just to help determine the feasibility and the application of some of the different technologies. The team really looks at a very wide range of different topics and requests. Everything from energy storage to carbon capture, new generation technologies, some of the ones you hit on, hydrogen and nuclear. There's certainly been quite a bit of discussion about those recently on the nuclear side, both traditional and small modular reactors. And really, Basin's currently in the monitoring phase, on both of those fronts, hydrogen and nuclear. The team continually stays engaged with the equipment manufacturers, some of the technology providers, our engineering consultants, and our peers. We're aware that the equipment manufacturers are working hard, developing solutions that could burn hydrogen to generate electricity. But the supply of hydrogen and the costs involved currently are challenging, and there's similar challenges with nuclear. I know Alex talked about it a little bit earlier today. The costs are high, and they're still years away, from being really a solid option. And not only are the costs high, they're not very consistent. The different numbers, being floated around are not really yet very repeatable either. So that's important. So Basin's going to continue to monitor and learn from other ongoing projects and activities, and we'd kind of prefer an nth of a kind type of project. Let a few projects get started. We view that as a little bit less risky for the membership.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end here. I want to, I think what we've tried to impress upon everybody here is that we got a lot going on. There's tremendous amount of investment coming, with lots of challenges that we see with EPA and other things. But I think, well, you can rest assured that you're in a good place with a good family. We got good processes in place. We got some great people. They're even a lot tamer than I thought. I thought this was going to get a lot more out of hand than it did, so we'll have to work on that for next year. But we wanted to thank you for putting your trust in your cooperative, Basin Electric. I want to thank the board for all the panelists for all their time and knowledge here. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.